Hello, hi everyone. My name is Todd Schweitzer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Brankas. Brankas is an open banking and fintech startup operating across Southeast Asia. And in this session, looking forward to sharing a lot of hopefully helpful knowledge to startups in the Philippines on what open banking means, what it actually means concretely for startups and how they can make use of this technology, and in fact, how some startups in the Philippines are already partnering with banks and partnering with each other to build new products using open banking and APIs. First off, though, I'd like to give a big thanks to Philippine Startup Week and to the sponsors, especially Kubo, DTI, DICT, and all the sponsors that helped made Philippine Startup Week happen, and very grateful for their support. So first off, a bit about Brankas, right? So Brankas is a Philippine-based company now operating across Southeast Asia, and we focus on modern digital financial solutions, right? And a lot of what we're talking about today will involve the use of API technology. Many startups are aware of what APIs are in a basic sense, but today's session is really focused on how do APIs as bank products help to transform a startup and really solve some of the operational problems and product-related problems that startups are now facing. But just a bit about Brankas. So we operate across Southeast Asia. We're about 70 staff now. I think interestingly, we operate as a remote first company. So this is pre-COVID. We operated as a distributed team. This, of course, became quite beneficial when everyone went work from home. And backed by venture capital firms in the US and in Southeast Asia. What Brankas does, so Brankas is bringing open banking to Southeast Asia. What does this mean? This means we do many things to help build the ecosystem, right? Because this is a very new industry, this idea of open banking. So number one, we work with bank partners. We have bank partners in the Philippines and across Southeast Asia, helping them launch APIs as products. And we can do that very quickly and have a number of kind of productized way of making that happen. We also work with a number of fintechs, lending, payments, KYC providers, neobanks and digital banks, e-wallets, all sorts of fintech and online businesses to make it much easier and efficient for them to plug into banks, to have access to account data, authentication, payments, even things like account opening are becoming possible now. We are also a member of the APIX Advisory Council. APIX is a region-wide initiative, actually out of Singapore. Really, the main backers are the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the central bank, as well as the ASEAN Bankers Association and some other sponsors like the World Bank, IFC, and others. And really, APIX is a region-wide initiative to build the technology that enables faster collaboration between financial institutions and fintechs. And Brankas is fortunate to be on their advisory council and a key technology partner, helping to drive faster and better innovation between financial institutions and fintechs. We also do a lot of policy guidance work. This concept of open banking, which we'll be discussing today, is a very new and really unregulated space. Most of Southeast Asia does not have regulation in place or any laws or even any governing standards or central bank guidelines that relate to open banking and open financial products via API. And so Brankas takes a lead with BSP here in the Philippines, as well as Bank Indonesia, OJK in Indonesia, Bank of Thailand in Thailand, and other regulators to share best practices and also share what we think is an agnostic point of view about what the right open banking technology should be to build really a fintech startup sector, right? Because we see open banking as it's an enabler, right? It's an enabler that makes it easier for fintechs to build fintech products, right? And partner with banks to launch new fintech products. So that's a little bit about Brankas. Moving forward. So I want to share some examples of what open banking looks like in the real world, right? So rather than give definitions and going to an academic formula, I just want to describe what open banking looks like today in the Philippines and some other markets. So one example that I love because it's a really good product is linking your Union Bank account to Gcash. So for those of you who are familiar with this, basically what you can do is, as a way to cash into Gcash, you can basically link your Union Bank account using your online banking credentials. So I go to the cash in window, I select Union Bank, I authenticate, or I confirm my identity using my username and password. What's going on behind the scenes is Gcash then calls Union Bank's API. In other words, it communicates with Union Bank via API, says, hey, Todd, is Todd actually an account holder at Union Bank? If so, are these his credentials? Union Bank will then say, yes, it is. Send me an OTP to confirm. After I've confirmed with the OTP, it displays my accounts, and I choose which accounts I want to link to my Union Bank, to my Gcash wallet, right? This whole process takes like 10 seconds. It's remarkable, right? And all of this is possible because Gcash is using an API that Union Bank provides to instantly link an account, right? Now, once my account is linked, then I can instantly top up funds without needing to open Union Bank app and send money to Gcash, then check if Gcash was received. Moving forward, I can just indicate the amount I want to top up, and then in about 5 seconds, I can basically initiate what is called a pull payment, right? Or I can pull funds from my Union Bank account into my Gcash account, right? So this is an example of the payments API, in this case, a Union Bank payments API being consumed by or used by Gcash in order to allow a third party, me, to move money easily in and out of between my Gcash and my Union Bank accounts, right? So in Europe, where there's already a mandate and a requirement for banks to provide open banking APIs, this is already a requirement. But in the Philippines, there's really only 2 banks that allow this, BPI or not allow, but have enabled this. And that's really BPI and Union Bank. Another example is statement aggregation. Which in the European open banking standards is called the AISP model, so Account Information Service Provider. So what this is a way for you as a customer to link your bank statements so that you can have a single view and view all your accounts from all different banks in a single place. So this is an example from the UK because this isn't quite happening in the Philippines yet, although it's coming soon. So this is actually a screenshot from a colleague's bank, which is Lloyds Bank in the UK. So in Lloyds Bank app, I can tap the open banking button. I then see in the center screenshot a list of all of the banks that are available for account linking. And then once I choose NatWest, I then consent to share my data. I enter my NatWest credentials. And then from that point forward, I can see an aggregated view inside my Lloyds Bank app. I can see the NatWest account balance and transaction statement alongside my Lloyds Bank account information. So this is very helpful from like a budgeting perspective. It's great for credit scoring, right? So as a way for lenders, whether that's a bank or a non-bank alternative lender, to very quickly assess whether or not a customer should or a borrower should qualify for a loan, and as well as, especially with the COVID situation, micro merchants, right? So allowing these online sellers to basically track their income and expenses in a single dashboard, right? And so this statement aggregation model becomes very important and valuable, not just for the customer, but also for the financial institution who can now provide a new product on top using these aggregated statements. Next slide. So statement aggregation is not just for personal, it's also for corporate accounts. So Brankas, for example, we have a company in Singapore as well, and we use Xero for accounting. Xero is a small business accounting platform. And in Singapore, I can link my UOB. UOB is the bank we use in Singapore. I can link my UOB bank statement into my Xero accounting app. So what does this mean? This means instead of downloading statements or manually our accounting team keying in every transaction, we actually just get a statement feed coming directly in from UOB. It shows up on our Xero accounting ledger, and it makes reconciliation super easy because we can see all of the debits and credits that come in without needing to manage any upload, download of files. So it makes for a super, super smooth process. And then you can do cool things like, there's auto categorization, and it can start to predict cash flow and things like that. So very helpful, not just for personal accounts, but also for corporate accounts. Next slide. So another use case is authentication. Authentication is a big word, but basically it just means identity checks, right? It's a way of confirming, am I actually the person that is trying to log into this account, right? And the most common way for authentication that we know is username, password, right? That's typically how you log into any app, or whether it's financial or otherwise, right? Now in Singapore, Singapore has a national online ID called SingPass, and so me in Singapore, I can now use my SingPass, my national ID, to actually open a new bank account and access that bank account. So the equivalent here would be like the login with Google or login with Facebook. So I'm sure, in the audience, you've used applications where you can skip the sign up process by just logging in using your Google account or LinkedIn account or Facebook account, or sometimes for developer platforms, you can log in using GitHub, right? Same idea, but for fintech, right? So if I'm able to open an account, skip the onboarding process by logging in using a national ID, then that really speeds up the process by which I can access financial products, right? So what might this look like in the Philippines? This could look like me opening a new e-wallet app. Let's say I sign up as a new user on Gcash. Maybe I can use a bank where I'm already a customer as a way of doing my identity check, right? So that way I don't have to go through the Gcash video call and check to get me to premium level. Maybe I can just like log in through another bank, and that bank will do the authentication on our behalf, right? This gets a bit technical, but it's for those in fintech, the sign up and authentication and identity verification, or the KYC process, the know your customer process, is both super painful, super manual, often super expensive, and it's a big drop in conversion. So being able to do third-party authentication and allowing your customers to skip the sign-up process is a huge benefit. So I suspect that we will see third-party authentication in the Philippines very, very soon. And that's going to be pretty exciting. Another example is account opening through partner apps. Now, there's only really one example of this in the Philippines, and that's the GSave app. I'm giving plenty of credit to Gcash, but they have some good examples of open banking. But in my Gcash app, I can actually sign up for a savings account. Now, this savings account is actually a CIMB account, which is co-branded as a GSave account, right? But think about this. So in my Gcash app, I can decide to open a savings account. I'm using the same authentication and the same identity checks that I've already provided to Gcash. And that way I have a super quick process for onboarding as a savings account holder for CIMB, right? At that point, it's now CIMB's, it's up to CIMB how they want to upsell or offer me a new product or whatever. But from a distribution and customer acquisition point of view, super shortcut. And it's a really exciting feature, and something I think that we will see a lot more of. And I know that a number of banks and others are looking at ways to do third-party account opening. So this is very valuable for fintechs for a number of ways, right? Because you can earn commissions by doing third-party account opening, but you can also engage your own users by providing linking of accounts, right? So a lot of benefits here. Next slide. So I think this is the last example, but and this is thinking kind of a little bit further down the road, but it's not too far away. This is in Indonesia. So Tokopedia is one of the largest e-commerce sites in Indonesia. This example I'm showing, if you are a seller on Tokopedia today, you can choose to get financing as a seller, so inventory financing, from 11 different partners. And you can you enter the type of financing you want and the type of amount, and based on your seller history, based on any other accounts you've linked, and based on some other data that Tokopedia has gotten from you, you agree to share that data with different potential lending partners, and then you can choose to access and immediately have available financing for your online store through Tokopedia. Now, what I find so fascinating about this is a few things. Number one, this is loan origination. So this is end-to-end signing up for a loan, in this case, an e-commerce inventory loan, entirely through a third-party site, in this case, the Tokopedia seller page. Number two is you have 11 different lenders, but they all come from different kind of parts of the world, right? You have some international banks, you have some local Indonesian banks, you have e-wallet, OVO, that's actually offering a financing product, and you have a number of startups like Investry and Modalku or funding societies, and you have non-bank lenders or multi-finance lenders like BFI Finance that are also, and they're all competing in the same space, right? This is beneficial to the lenders because financing, like acquiring a borrower, acquiring a customer, is very cheap because this is Tokopedia's sellers, right? It's also great for the lender because you're accessing the seller data, right? You're able to see what the seller has actually sold. So it's really verifiable data. It's great for Tokopedia because now their sellers can sell more because they have a line of credit. It's great for the customers because now when they're shopping, they can access a bigger inventory. So this is really win-win-win across the board. And I think we will see more and more of this in the Philippines as well. And it's a pretty exciting view of the future. Next slide. Okay, so to summarize, I think typical open banking products that we are seeing a little bit in the Philippines, but really across Southeast Asia. Number one is account information and statement sharing, right? So this can be for credit scoring, alternative lenders, accounting or budgeting apps. We went through that. Number two is for authentication or identity, right? So think of this as signing in using your bank credentials in order to basically shortcut the customer onboarding or sign up process, right? Number three is payments. Right. So as we know in the Philippines, by far the most common way to pay online is by bank transfer. Right. And so more and more ways that the more that banks can provide APIs to enable bank transfer, the more we'll see this adoption pick up. Right. And the less reliance that the fintechs will have on intermediaries like payment gateways, and they can actually connect directly to bank APIs in order to initiate a bank transfer from account A to account B, right? And then the fourth product that we're seeing more and more of is account opening and origination, and this is taking place through fintech partners as well as e-commerce marketplaces. Next slide. Yeah. So next, I want to introduce Clarence. Clarence Bondok is one of our business development and partnership leads here at Brankas, and he's going to talk about new ways that we've seen companies partner with banks to build and access new products. So Clarence, over to you, man.
Thanks, Todd, for the introduction. So again, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Clarence, and I handle business development within Brankas Philippines. And I guess to begin my part, if there's anything I want you guys to get out of this part or this session, is that there's a new way for companies to gain access to financial service, and it's called open banking. And in order for us to picture what that means is, let's go to the next slide. We can see on the left side on what is currently happening right now, right? So if you were a startup, or if you were a company and you wanted to access, let's say, financial services from BPI, you'd have to go to BPI, open an account with BPI, maintain a relationship with BPI. And then if you'd want to access the same services with BDO, you'd have to go through the same process, and you'd have to go through the same KYC process. You'd have to go through the same onboarding process. And then again, if you need to access it from Union Bank, and then again, if you need to access it from Security Bank or RCBC or PNB. And you'll see that as your company grows, it's a good opportunity for you to be connected with more banks, but there's also a negative way in which there's a lot of time and effort that it takes to build that relationship, right? So what is currently happening right now in the financial services sector is that companies that need to get access to financial services needs to establish one-on-one relationships with each bank. Now, what can happen? What can happen is on the right side of the screen. which says that companies can gain access to the same financial services with less hassle. And again, how does that happen? It happens through open banking. So as Todd mentioned, open banking is really the opening up of banks and their services to allow third parties or to allow companies to easily access financial services. So how does Brankas fit into all of this? So next slide, please. So we fit into all of this because we do the heavy lifting of setting up these partnerships with financial institutions. So how does it happen? Like, what are the foundations that need to be set up for this whole thing to come into place? And the most important thing is the bank needs to have an open API policy, meaning the bank needs to have APIs so that Brankas can integrate with them, which can then be freely shared and be consumed by third-party companies. What we currently see right now in the financial sector here in the Philippines is that there are at least two banks that already have an open banking sort of mindset, and that's, like, as Todd mentioned, Union Bank and BPI. And what we're looking to see is that as the market and as other banks see the benefit in having an open banking policy, an open banking framework, we want them to start developing and start putting open APIs as part of their product roadmap and as part of their development. So what does Brankas do, for instance? So on the supply side, what we do is we really connect first with the banks to their APIs. Once that's done, we become an official onboarding partner of the bank. So we work out either a referral or an incentive scheme so that Brankas can act as an official onboarding partner for the bank. And once we're connected to those APIs and once we become an official onboarding partner, we can now go to market and sell these APIs to companies on behalf of these banks. So, and we'll be discussing later on what kind of products these can be. But for now, I'd like to go to a case study or our partnership with Union Bank. So next slide, please. So we've had the privilege and the benefit of being able to work and have a strategic partnership with Union Bank of the Philippines. The partnership entails Brankas as a master licensee of Union Bank's APIs. What does that mean? That means that generally all of Union Bank's APIs that are exposed to the public, Brankas can integrate with. And once we integrate with them, we have explicit consent from Union Bank that we can actually sell the same APIs to the market. So not only do we become another channel for Union Bank, but we also lessen the onboarding time for customers to easily access financial services. So what does that mean again for startups and companies? That means that not only can you talk to Union Bank directly to access these APIs, but you also get another channel in which you can access financial services. And uh, before that, we've actually, because of our partnership with Union Bank, we've even been able to create our very own product that caters to these Facebook, Viber and people who sell on those platforms, which we will be talking about later. So next slide, please. So what does that mean, right? So it means for the bank, it means that Brankas will serve as a new channel for customer acquisitions with very minimal costs on their end. We become sort of another sales arm, and we also become another onboarding partner for them. So it and we align ourselves with the increased usage of the APIs and the increased transactions that it can bring to the bank. In this case, for Union Bank, one of their KPIs was they need to increase the number of clients who use Union Bank APIs, and they need to increase the number of transactions that go through them, whether or not it's a new to bank client or whether it's already an existing client that's already using an existing but non-digitized or non-API based product. And ultimately, it means a faster onboarding time that we can give to the bank, right? So we're all aware that sometimes it might take longer for the bank to process certain documents because of either the sheer number of volume that goes through them. But either way, Brankas will serve as a channel for onboarding, and this will greatly help the bank reduce the rate of onboarding time. And now, what does this mean for companies or startups? So, what this means is that you get easy and fast access to Union Bank financial services via APIs. So, if you look at the Union Bank developer portal right now and you see some of their APIs that you like, Brankas is now legally and because of our strategic partnership also allowed to integrate or sell the same APIs through our own services. So again, for startups and for companies, we become another channel in which access to financial services can be gained or can be accessed. And another thing is that we streamline the way you integrate with financial services through APIs. Now, we've been discussing a lot about what Union Bank can do, right? And that's really because it's only Union Bank right now that is giving the full effect of what an open banking API and open banking framework can do. Now, imagine if every other bank, every other major bank, even rural bank, even an e-wallet has an open banking policy. It means that now, if a startup would want to connect to one financial service, they just have to talk to Brankas, and we, as Brankas, will be able to go to the company and say, "Hey, here's a fund transfer API. Oh, and by the way, that already contains all major banks in the Philippines, including rural banks and EMIs." So that is what we are trying. That is what we can look for. That is what we can look ahead to, as we see open banking to be, part of the regulatory framework in the Philippines and also part of the development roadmap of these banks. So now if it entails a faster onboarding time for banks, it also entails a less processing time for these startups and these companies, right? So they don't have to wait 2 weeks to a month on processing times that these banks sometimes may give. And what that entails is that the company can now focus more on their products rather than on building or making sure that their integration with the banks is foolproof, right? And that's it on my part. And I'll turn you over to Kitch, who will be talking about how do open banking initiatives support your business.
Thanks, Clarence, for that introduction. I'm Kitch Lazatin, handling together with Clarence the business development side and also territory management here in the Philippines. So Todd earlier mentioned about the different use cases and opportunities for open banking. And Clarence has also talked about the partnerships that we've been working on here in the Philippines. But of course, the question really that everyone is probably asking or interested in is what that means concretely, and also what are the key areas that can be supported if we talk about the opportunities for today, right? And so for the next few minutes, what I'd like to be focusing on is the key areas that have typically been the pain points for many growing businesses and how Brankas can actually support you in that one. So first and foremost, let's talk about payments. Todd talked about the opportunities for payments earlier in his overview. But really, when we talk about payments here in the Philippines, even if digital payments has been around for quite some time, somehow it remains to still be a pain point for many industries, many companies, big and small, but particularly for the smaller businesses or for those that are just starting out. right? And so with Brankas taking that into consideration, what we've actually enabled for a lot of these, for the demand side or for the providers, is a way to enjoy instant and convenient ways of receiving payments, right? So instead of the reliability on maybe intermediaries or third-party providers or going the manual process, what Brankas has actually enabled is to the instant fund transfer capability, right? Or being able to accept online payments via bank transfer. And this is done through the API technology and expertise that we have here, and it's done, in a very secure manner with the proper authentications with our respective bank partners as well. And the great thing about this is that it's actually designed as well to fit seamlessly with a business's web or mobile application, right? So it's designed not just to make it easier for you to receive payments, but it's also designed to enable your customers to experience that convenience as well within the native environment of the business through a digital platform or portal, right? And so if you're going to look at the next slide, Brankas has actually even, enabled this in such a way that it's just done in terms of high-level process flow in just 6 easy steps, right? And from the get-go, it seems like it's simple enough, but when you talk about bank integrations, as Clarence was talking about, imagine a world where you actually have to go through each and every one bank that you would want to partner with, and trying to establish the different authentication flows, engagements, and building that relationship for every bank, right? What Brankas has done rather is enabled this in such a way that you not only have the capability to receive payments, but from a customer or front-facing side, we've already established the authentication and the security measures to enable these types of transactions, right? So you'll see the first 3 steps here are basically revolving around driving user consent, which is, of course, the #1 priority when it comes to being able to transact security. And then basically mimicking and adapting the different authentication flows that you would see in, if you're accessing your mobile application. But again, this high-level process flow that I'm presenting here is one that you can actually embed within your own web and mobile application, right? So it can actually be designed to fit and adapt to your respective user interfaces, right? And the next slide would actually show the second half of the transaction payments. Again, it's just 3 additional steps, essentially, wherein end user can immediately pull funds from their respective bank accounts, process the different authorization requirements, whether that's a single one-time PIN or 2-factor authentication. Brankas has enabled this to be adapted on a per bank basis. And basically, after that, that's it. Like, the end user would receive a confirmation of a successful transaction and can proceed back to your mobile and web application for other transactions or other activities, right? So it's very simple, but we've also, it's very simple for your end users, and it's also very simple for a lot of the businesses to actually connect to the different banks in this case, right? So that's for being able to receive payments. Now, when we also talk about payments, we understand that in light of the digital age, or during the pandemic days right now, there's been a surge in the demand for requesting payments, right? And together with the first use case that I mentioned, if you're able to receive payments instantly, the next question would be, how can I better communicate this to my customers? If, for example, I would actually need to issue an invoice or a means to be able to communicate the billing, so to speak, to my customer without it happening within the mobile application, or if you want to be able to communicate in other channels for that one, right? So what Brankas has been able to do here is we've provided a service wherein you can actually request payment and standardize the process for requesting such from your customers, right? So what we're familiar with essentially is the screenshot process, wherein you would actually request payment from your customers via a platform. You would wait for them. You would actually give your bank credentials to your customer. You would wait for the payment to be received, or for the screenshot to be sent to you, and then you actually double check with your account before you actually process the entire transaction, right? So Brankas aims to streamline this one by making it easy to request payments via a uniquely generated URL that can be shared to your customers via any platform of your choice, right? So again, with this one, it's actually designed to instantly and securely process these payments again, because that's really our primary priority for that one. And the great thing about this one is, while it seems similar to the first use case that I mentioned, another layer that is largely beneficial for these businesses is the ability to track and reconcile payments as they land into your bank account, right? So the first use case, you're able to actually receive payments from the back end. And then with the second use case for requesting payments, even if you actually take out this uniquely generated link, into informal channels, let's say Facebook or Viber, especially for those that are using, the social media platforms for communicating to customers, you are also enabled to quickly reconcile and track these payments as they land into your bank account, right? And so if you move on to the next slide, you'll see that we provide a high-level process flow here of how a business can actually generate an invoice from within that service and generate that unique invoice link that they can share to their end users, right? And when they do click on that link, basically the customer would be prompted that a business is requesting payment for a particular transaction, and they would eventually also be brought to the first process flow that I shared, where they can actually pull payments from their bank accounts as well, right? And so that is primarily some of the critical or high-level opportunities for payments to be able to reduce the friction or the challenges when it comes to digital payments. But of course, we know that it's just not limited there, right? Like when you talk about the new digital age and the surge in all these transactions on a digital platform, there is also a rise in the demand for what we call data access or data information, right? And the challenge with data access is that even if there is an abundance of information readily available, there's always that three-letter word that comes into mind when we talk about data, and that is what we call the DPA, or the Data Privacy Act. Because while there is an abundance of information from a lot of the fintechs and even from the bank side, there are so many sensitivities that are circulating these types of processes, right? And what Brankas aims and has been able to provide as of today is really an ability to securely and be able to access that information in compliance with the Data Privacy Act, and also enable this in an instant or almost real-time way, right? So that's a two-pronged type of service that we're able to deliver as of today. And as Todd mentioned earlier, with the statement aggregation and the authentication services that he touched on earlier, really this is very helpful for a lot of businesses, because if, let's say, you are in the lending business or the financing business, this can actually serve as alternative data that you can incorporate for your credit scoring and make new informed loan decisions. But even if you're not in that industry, you can actually utilize that to be able to access reliable bank transaction data, maybe identity data for verification as well, and utilize this for faster reconciliation. And the way that Brankas has really done this is with the priority of being able to free up the manual and operational resources that is more commonly practiced today, right? And if you look at the process flow here, it again very straightforward. We enable a lot of we enable our bank partnerships in that process flow. We provide the interface for that one, and we also drive the user consent. And that's one of the key areas where we take pride in being able to say that we ensure compliance with the Data Privacy Act, right? And so the next slide would essentially be the last two confirmation, or the last two stages for being able to secure that transaction data or the statement data. And for someone who is an end user, the ability to be able to consent or request for something like that in such a seamless manner and in such a short and convenient manner is something that is very much worth highlighting compared to how you would normally request for a bank statement if you're in the bank. Maybe it takes 2 to 3 days, even if it's a digital request, and maybe prior to COVID, it's actually even a very manual process where you actually have to go to the bank depending on where your account is, right? So that is another key area when it comes to information during the digital age, right? And another key thing that I would like to highlight, or another key area that I would like to highlight, is again the ability to actually do an account opening or loan origination or signups on the platform, right? So typically, when we talk about the account opening, this is probably something that most banks, most businesses would think, oh, that's something for the banks to do. And yes, they are actually moving towards the digital account opening. But at Brankas, what we believe is that it shouldn't just be limited to these financial institutions, right? As the banks actually build together with Brankas the opportunities to, set up the account opening, digital account opening end to end on their platforms, or maybe loan origination on their digital platforms, we believe that this can actually be extended further into third-party platforms, right? Because especially during these days where with the pandemic, a lot of the branches where these transactions were typically happening are now limited, or basically in terms of being able to capture that network is now hampered down. We need to find more and more ways to be able to distribute these opportunities, right? And so as the banks build the account opening opportunities or enable a lot of these opportunities, we also work with the banks to be able to build it in such a way that third-party providers can also utilize it. Or when I talk about utilizing it, be able to serve as essentially an onboarding channel of these partner banks, right? So we essentially bring to these businesses the opportunity to originate a lot of these activities that are typically found in the branches and bring that into their platform so that in terms of customer engagement, you can actually offer more financial services in your mobile platform or in your web portal, and basically also serve as key opportunity to be able to pursue open banking, so to speak, right? And really, open bank, I just focused on 3 key areas that we've seen as a trend for the businesses, for startups in the last few months, especially in light of the pandemic. But when I talk about open banking, as Todd and Clarence has already mentioned, it really can be an endless list of use cases, right? And as we work with the banks for this one, we always take into consideration how this translates or what this could translate to when it comes to the businesses or the supply side, the demand side, as we call it, right? And especially for those fintech providers and the startup businesses that are gearing up to be able to provide many services in the industry. Yes. So with that, I'd like to bring you back to Todd for more discussion.
Great, thank you. And I'll bring on both Kitch and Clarence, and we can have just a couple minutes of follow-up. My first question is to Kitch. So, Kitch, you shared some great examples of what open banking products look like and how Brankas is helping provide aggregated products on the user side, right, the demand side. So, can you give a few examples? Don't have to name names, but like, what are some kind of unconventional or new requests that you're getting from clients, right? For example, I know that actually, we think about some of these APIs as a product for fintechs, right? So that they can more easily connect to banks. But on some of these around payments and others, we're seeing actually interest from the banks themselves as a consumer of APIs, right? And I know that e-commerce and some other other industries are actually looking at ways of using open banking APIs. So what are you seeing and what are you hearing from customers?
So thanks for that question, Todd. Actually, it's a very good one. As you mentioned, there's been a growing trend from the fintech side and even with the banks when it comes to different types of products. What we've seen as a trend is, of course, first and foremost, the ability to do fund transfers immediately, or what we call, the pull payments. But we've also seen different types of products that are kind of an evolution wherein, we see a request for combined products wherein you do a pull transaction, but it's matched with a statement pull as well. And primarily, this seems to be a trend that we're seeing for the lending business, so that it's very seamless for their customers, but they're also able to gather information from their customers, right? And then another one that we've seen both on the fintech side and also on the bank side is actually the request payment facility, right? So when we did the request payment feature, what we primarily had in mind in Brankas is a means for the informal businesses to actually standardize their process, right? But
these are the Facebook sellers, the Instagram sellers, right?
Yes. So, the micro SMEs who are posting their bank information on their highlights or in their as a photo as a post in their respective platforms, so that they can facilitate payments faster. But as we've come to discuss also with potential bank clients, we've seen this requirement surface for their merchants, right? And while there are some key differences, because the banks are more likely to request for the bulk invoice capabilities, the fact that we're seeing this kind of trend across the industry is something very interesting already, right? Like we're seeing not only an appetite for receiving payments, but being able to extend the capability to, I guess, collect and expand the use case for billing.
Yeah,
right?
it becomes a collections product for the transaction banking group to actually offer to their corporate clients, right? As a way of and as an alternative, I guess, to your typical payment gateways, right? And maybe Kitchen, a follow-on would be, can you just, like, to put a finer point on it, because this is sometimes confusing, like, we're describing open banking APIs to support payments, right? As one use case, right? Open banking APIs can do many things. Payments and fund transfer is one use case. But can you articulate, like, how is this different than your typical payment gateway?
All right. So with the payment gateway, typically the process for that, if I'm just going to break it down, is they act as an intermediary, meaning that they do handle the funds. They do enable a lot of payment modes or methods as their bulk offering, but the turnaround time or the settlement process is a little bit more different, right?
Yeah. And what does handle funds mean? What does handle funds mean?
So when we talk about handling funds, what that means is if a customer would choose to pay in an e-commerce platform, and there is a payment gateway behind that, the payment of the customer actually lands on a bank account of a payment gateway first and foremost, right? And they do a batch reconciliation for that within the day, and then depending on the banks that they're actually conversing with, there are different timelines for that, right? So if you've actually shopped on any e-commerce platform, while there are options for online bank transfer, you'll see probably that the turnaround time would say maybe 3 to 5 days before they can confirm the payment, right? Because there's a whole entire long process that is enabled by the payment gateways, right? And that's really their business model, so to speak, right? That's how they're able to generate their revenue, and that's why it works for them.
Yeah.
But we understand that smaller businesses would likely either want to streamline that process, or maybe just that model may not necessarily work for how they want to be able to scale or penetrate the market. So with the Brankas opportunity, we actually do a real-time transfer bank to bank. Like this is how you would imagine an InstaPay transfer being pushed from my bank account to your bank account. And it lands almost close to real time, if not real time. It utilizes the different available payment rails already, like InstaPay and Pasanet. And of course, this would be a little bit more cost efficient or economical when you look at that business model, right? Compared to what is being
and
offered.
lower risk, right? Because there's not a
Correct,
middleman involved
exactly.
that could potentially cause a reconciliation issue or slow down in settlement time. Yep.
Correct, right?
Yeah. So
And
really,
the
the
funds
Brankas,
never
I
land.
think the difference is, the Brankas is just instructing the bank, hey, debit account A and credit account B,
Correct.
right? It's just sending a payment instruction for the bank to process. It is not Brankas processing the payment directly. And I think that's an
Correct.
important distinction from a risk perspective, from an efficiency perspective. Because there's not an intermediary, there's much less cost involved. And I think a big deal for the merchant is, they're able to have the reconciliation that that a payment gateway would typically provide, but and without needing to do the screenshot of your deposit slip of your customer's
Exactly.
deposit slip and going through all that reconciliation. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Clarence, so talking about the bank side, just help us understand, because I think there's a typical expectation that we talk about Union Bank or BPI or a couple others are working to build API products, or they claim to have API products. So for a fintech watching this, they may think, okay, we'll just go to the bank and ask for API access, right? And the bank has the API, so we just go to the bank and ask for the API. But what's the real world process for that we have experienced as a user of the API? Like, what does that actual onboarding process typically look like, right? That'll help, I think, illustrate the difference between, go ahead.
Yep. So thanks, Todd. So I guess we can begin by, like all other bank services, there is a financial cost to it. And like all other bank services, usually a bank would require you to submit a lot of regulatory requirements. One of them would be like your SEC papers, uh, and then you'd have to put up a certain number of ADB, just like any other financial like service that you'd want from them.
What's ADB?
ADB is usually an average daily balance that the company would have to maintain as a deposit with the bank. So it has to sit there for at least a month to be counted as ADB for the month. And sometimes that
Yeah.
cash, it could be significant, right? And that's cash that could be used to actually be your working capital rather than just sitting there,
Yeah, of course.
right? And
Yeah.
then, other than that, there's usually an onboarding process where certain documents need to be filled out back and forth with the developer team or the onboarding team of the bank itself. And I guess the
Yeah.
main difference with Brankas, if they onboard with us, is that one, they ultimately immediately get access to sandbox credentials, an API documentation portal, and we really just require them to do one set of signatures, right?
And that's the documentation portal is another big one, because banks will not always, I won't name names, but banks do not always have an up-to-date testing environment and documentation portal, which is it's a technical discussion, but basically your developer portal is a way to allow developers on the fintech side, right, to figure out how to use the API and basically figure out how to plug in before they go live, right? And without having that sandbox, without having the testing data, without having the simulated environment of a developer portal, it becomes documents delivered through a PDF file, maybe sent over Viber, and back and forth with the tech team. I mean, I myself, in Indonesia and the Philippines, as we've been onboarding bank APIs, sooner or later, it usually involves like a WhatsApp group or a Viber group and sending basically doing UAT and testing and all sorts of troubleshooting with our bank's developer team, like super informally, right? And that is, just frankly speaking, like that's a waste of time, right? It's a waste of time for the bank, because now they have to have effectively a technical support team, which is not banking activities, right? And they have to have technical support for every single partner that they onboard. And then on the fintech side, like these are technology companies, like we're used to plugging into APIs. but we need the documentation. Our developers need the documentation and the testing environment to figure out how to plug in, right? And if we don't have that, then it becomes a walkthrough, which is super annoying for our developers. It's time consuming and resource intensive for the bank's developers, and it just slows everything down and frankly defeats the purpose of having APIs, which are meant to be scalable, right? And reduce all this manual effort, right? So I think you describe it well. And another thing, Clarence, is like we know that open banking is largely unregulated, but what are the emerging, like how do open banking products today in the Philippines fit with the regulatory environment? I know Kitch mentioned the data privacy agreement, but how do we make sure that Brankas is complying and that our partners are complying and that our bank partners are complying with whatever regulations that do exist? And how do we know that this is a safe activity?
Yep. Okay. So just to put it out there, first and foremost, there is no one regulatory BSP policy that encompasses open banking, not unlike PSD2 in Europe, right? So that is a general, PSD2 is a general framework that the central authority in the UK has asked their banks to abide by. There is nothing like that in the Philippines yet. So where do we go from there, right? So what we have is one, data privacy. So the NPC, we have to abide by data privacy laws, meaning one, we can't just get the information from banks without asking the consent from the end users directly, right? And
Yeah.
so those are some considerations that we have to take into account when we launch our product. On the other end, we don't just uh, go through a bank's app and circumvent their security protocols, right? We don't just say, hey, we can pull funds from your bank account, but it doesn't go through OTPs, which makes it super fast, right? There's still
Yeah.
that security protocol, there is still that level of risk, compliance, and regulatory aspect that we take into account as we form our product. But more than
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
actually,
So
Brankas is
go ahead.
proactively approaching the BSP, right? Saying that since this is an unregulated space right now, and we, based on our experience in other countries, we would like to work with BSP to enable these best practices and please govern us as we both benefit from this sort of partnership, right? And
Yeah.
from there,
Yeah.
we start to include all of these other banks where they start to
Yeah.
get educated as well, and from there awareness forms in the
Yeah.
BSP would call it as a regulatory sandbox approach.
Yeah, so I think that's a great summary. I think the principles of open banking are number one. Even if the APIs exist, nothing happens without customer consent. Everything we do, every transaction, every piece of data, every payment that's done through open banking API is entirely based on explicit customer consent, right? And by the way, if the customer doesn't want to use APIs to link their e-wallet or to send a funds transfer to a Facebook seller, or to repay their loan, or to share their account data with a potential lender, like there is no obligation to do so. And they can continue doing the old way, which is go to the branch, print out bank statements, or download, upload, send PDFs, right? If in the same way that maybe several years ago and maybe even today, some people are nervous about using their credit card online, right? It's a similar thing, and some people are not comfortable with it yet, and that is okay, right? Because Brankas and open API providers will not execute an activity without the user's consent. The second, I think, is making sure that we are complying with the Data Privacy Act and any forthcoming BSP and SEC regulations around the use of digital banking data. And number three, as you point out, Clarence, is educating the regulator and at least sharing examples, right, with with the BSP and the Data Privacy Commission, the National Privacy Commission, and others, just on what we've observed in other markets, right? Because Brankas has done this, has implemented this in Indonesia, and in Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, and so we can at least bring some observations about what other regulators are doing, what we would suggest in terms of best practice, right? So we're just about out of time. So we'll conclude for now, but Kitch and Clarence, thank you so much for sharing insights. I think really great clarification on what open banking is, what it looks like today in the Philippines, and what this new industry is going to look like to accelerate fintech in the Philippines. Thank you very much, Kitch and Clarence, for joining, and thanks again to Philippine Startup Week for providing the session. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.